Good afternoon then, and welcome back to the History Channel, the History Fellow, this is another video on the BBC. As you can see, I have my BBC t-shirt on because I always think you can't really teach well if you don't have the correct t-shirt. So you may have seen some of the other videos in the series on the BBC, which have been either thematic, perhaps on the Director Generals or on the Commissions of Inquiry, or have been chronological, the BBC in the 20s, in the 30s, and so on and so forth. These videos were originally made for when we were in lockdown and to help people who are preparing the agrégation, the French exam to become a senior high school teacher. And this one is a little bit different. In fact, I must admit, I had hesitated a little before I looked at this one, because as you can see on your screen, this is intending to look at some key concepts of theory, that is theory about what happens when we watch a television program or when we listen to a radio program. And indeed, in the today, I will mostly be looking at television, but almost all of the theory applies equally well to radio programs. And it's important to remember the importance of radio in the history of the BBC. Now, the reason I hesitate is because I'm not really an expert on television theory or on media studies theory, but nevertheless, it seemed to me to be important to have a slightly more sophisticated view than the everyday view of what happens to us when we are in contact with the media. Because if we're not careful, we look at it. We look when John Reith said many years ago, the most important things are information, education, and entertainment. Well, if we're not careful, we could just have this idea, oh, well, the BBC produces information and we absorb it. And then the BBC produces education and we get educated. And then they produce entertainment. But it's much more, it's considerably more complex than that. What happens when people watch television programs or listen to radio programs is not always what the producers intended. And there have been a number of writers who have looked at some of the theory behind media communication, and we're going to look at some of them today. In fact, we're going to look at some key concepts. Not quite sure how many I will get through today. I'm expecting there to be 2 videos to get through my 6 concepts. So without further ado, I'll just have to get the technology into action, and then we can go.
Okay, some questions of theory. Now, you are not expected, if you want to succeed at the agrégation, you are not expected to become experts in television theory or in television studies. That's absolutely not necessary, which is good, because I am not really an expert in television studies either. However, it is necessary to have a slightly more sophisticated view of television than we normally have access to in everyday conversation. That is the whole question of what does the television do for people and what does the television do to people. We need to be a little bit sophisticated about that. And today, in the first section, I'm going to introduce, I think, 6 key concepts which will help you look at television. And this, one of the reasons to do this is to make a little bit more sophisticated, or as we might say in French, as we might say in French, problématiser, a couple of things we hear a lot about the BBC. Now, so the 2 statements which we hear all the time, which I was thinking needed a more sophisticated view, was number 1, does the BBC give the people what they want? Now, I've already spoken about this, and the time when we hear this the most is, John Reith mentions it in the 1920s, but the time when we hear this the most is in the early 1950s and the late 1940s, when there's a big debate, including in Parliament, about whether we need commercial television. The BBC is a public service, it's a monopoly, and the discussion in Parliament is, whether we need commercial television. And I already mentioned that this debate, give the people what they want or give the people what we think they need, is generally oversimplified. And indeed, one of the commissions of inquiry I mentioned, I think it's Pilkington, I'm pretty sure it's Pilkington, then the BBC doesn't give the people what the people really need, and we will. because we are independent from the states. And the BBC says, no, you won't give the people what they need. You will just give them what makes money. Yeah, you will just fill your commercial television with quiz shows with big cash prizes, and you will just flatter the rather less likable characteristics of ordinary people. So the only thing I'm saying about this is you have to look at it in a slightly more sophisticated way and not take at face value the statements of either one side or the other. And as I said, that I think it was Pilkington who said, on the one hand, the commercial people are really not so interested in giving the people what they want or doing things which that is good for the people's lives. And on the other hand, the BBC can be rather snotty and thinking they're the only people who know what people need. And the second very frequently discussed concept that I think need to be more sophisticated is the good old triad. That is that from the beginning, John Rees said, he didn't invent the expression, but he made it popular. The BBC must inform, educate, and entertain. And he said this in the 1920s, and this was perfectly his right, and it's been repeated since, and you've heard it, you see it in every book. However, we need to be careful about this. It's not as easy as it sounds. If you're not careful, you will think, oh yes, information, the news, education, documentaries, entertainment, everything else. But it's actually much more sophisticated than that. The people don't say, oh, what do I want tonight? Do I want to be informed or educated or entertained? I can't decide. Well, yes, I think I'll be entertained for an hour and then I'll inform myself for an hour. This is completely ridiculous. In fact, all of it is mixed together. Even if you take the news, look at the news about the presidential elections in France today, and the opinion polls. Oh yes, look, so and so's got 16%. They only had 14% last week. I wonder if they'll have 18% next week. Although this is information, it's also very entertaining. The debates of the Republican candidates, so people also see this as entertainment. There's a stress involved. On the other hand, if you watch a soap opera like EastEnders, you might learn something. When people watch the soap opera Grange Hill was supposed to be a realistic soap opera about life in a secondary school. And a lot of people watched it and said, oh, well, I want to see what sort of things really happens in schools today. And now the fact that it was not a documentary did not stop it from being sometimes educational, because it opened up questions which were really present in schools. Also, there are many kinds of programs that we rarely talk about if we're not careful in university circles. For example, cooking programs. Is this information, education, or entertainment? Well, it obviously has elements of popular education. This was part of the idea that the BBC thought that it was good to help people to have a wider view of what was possible to do in cooking. Just as I mentioned, for sports programs, that they tried to introduce people to new sports. But then, of course, at the same time, it's also education. So, in fact, also entertainment, because the presenters of cookery programs always try very hard to be funny in Britain. And cooking competitions are entertaining because competition is entertaining. And so these two elements, the do we give the people what they want and the inform, educate, entertain, I would like us to, take a little step backwards and say, well, this is what was being said, but is it all exactly true? Remember, there were at least two times when people suggested that the three ideas of inform, educate, entertain were not enough. One of the official commissions said we should have number 4, which is to enrich people's lives and suggest new possibilities to people to what they could do with their lives. So not quite educate, it's a more general idea. And then I think it was Tony Benn, the left-wing MP, who said, yes, the BBC should help people to adapt to a rapidly changing world. Now, these are, of course, opinions. You can argue about them. People agreed about them. People disagreed about them, which is fine. But they go further than just a very simple view of inform, educate, entertain, as if these are just open and shut cases. You can be entertained by a documentary about the life of Van Gogh. It's very entertaining. You can be educated by a film which is a fiction. And so on. In any case, let's have a look. And if I click, I have at least 2 mice here, mouses. And so if I click, here are my key concepts. So concept number one, the dangers of television. The dangers of television. Now, I may have already mentioned some of the people who talked about the dangers of television, or more generally, the dangers of popular culture. Theodor Adorno, a well-known, in my opinion, ex-Marxist, said that popular culture in general was a danger. Popular culture was turning people into children and using the mental energy to take away any real control they had over their lives. Theodor Adorno said that the culture industry, by which he meant Hollywood and the television and popular music companies, was creating needs in people. This is Theodor Adorno's idea, not mine. He said that the culture industry creates new cultural products and then creates the needs that go with them. Basically, he was saying that the record companies and Hollywood are deciding what you will like next year. And they're just bringing it out according to plan. And so manipulating, this is the idea, which we see around the place quite often, that really people are just sheep and they just absorb the television and it makes them stupid. Now, this is an opinion which I don't agree with, but it was a very, very influential opinion, which for Adorno was based on his own history, that he had been a Marxist and he was convinced that Germany, like all the Marxists, they were convinced that Germany was the place with the strongest trade unions, the strongest socialist parties, the strongest socialist culture, where we were going to see capitalism destroyed. And instead of that, of course, Hitler came to power and destroyed the working class movement, and a whole generation of intellectuals that then moved into a very, very pessimistic view of the world, where the working class will never change the world. Why? Because they've all become stupid because of popular culture. This is Theodor Adorno. Now, if we come into the period after the Second World War, because Theodor Adorno was writing in the 20s mostly, although a lot of his work became better known in the 50s, then you see a whole series of debates about the dangers of television violence, the dangers of the dangers of television violence. And here you have a slide then of a particular book about the books. This is a book about the books about television violence. Something you see a little less of it these days. These days you hear about violent video games. Are they harming children? But when I was young, everybody was convinced that violence on television was destroying the whole generation. And now I guess my generation has forgotten that we've been destroyed, and we're accusing the next generation of being destroyed. Here are another couple of books. Television violence and public policy, violence on television. Certainly, in general, it's true that today you see more violence on television. Some of the very popular series today are considerably more violent than the very popular series in the 1970s. But this doesn't seem to be making people more violent. So this is probably been an exaggeration here somewhere. Now I can see that someone's put a nice question in there. So let's see what it was. What was the release date? Right, there you're asking me a question which I forgot to check out. And so I'm afraid I can't tell you that, but I can certainly look them up I will Google them later, and then I'll be able to tell you. This one perhaps is slightly better known. This is Neil Postman. Amusing ourselves to death. So he's not talking about violence. He's talking about entertainment on television in general. And you can see here is a very Adorno type picture. The man and the woman whose heads have disappeared. They have no longer a brain. They have no longer a mind. They only have a television in its place. And this is a very simplistic, but not rare view of what television does to people. And in general, however, it has to be said that people who study television do not agree with this rather simple view. Now, a slightly more sophisticated view of the dangers of television, a more sophisticated view of the dangers of television would come from somebody like Pierre Bourdieu, so the extremely renowned French sociologist, member of the Collège de France, who died a few years ago, very much on the left, a little in, probably the left, that section of the left that didn't want to touch Marxism, although he used little bits of Marx. And this is what he said: La télévision a une sorte de monopole de fait sur la formation des cerveaux d'une partie très importante de la population. Or, en mettant l'accent sur les faits divers, en remplissant ce temps rare avec du vide, du rien ou du presque rien, on écarte les informations pertinentes que devraient posséder les citoyens pour exercer ses droits démocratiques. Now, this is slightly more moderate, if you like, than Adorno. He's not saying they've all become stupid, but he is suggesting that, really television, there's nothing to defend. Just as Adorno felt that in popular culture there's nothing to defend. Now, this is a little, what is a little worrying about, well, what's a little concerning about Bourdieu is that he was very much a philosopher. That is, that he wrote in general about television. He was not involved in any empirical studies on television. He had done some empirical things on other stuff. Whereas people who look at a representative group of people and what television they watch and what effect it has on, do not come to these conclusions that, il y a rien, presque rien, c'est du vide. However, perhaps Bourdieu's ideas are a little stronger when he's talking about how information is structured. Les faits divers, l'événement. The event is at the center. If it's not an event, it doesn't count. And this is why, if hotel workers go on strike against low wages, that's an event and it's on the news. But if every week for 10 years they receive low wages and struggle to survive, that's not it's not news because it's not an event. Whereas, it might be argued that it was very important. So let's say that television news certainly structures the way we see the world, and I will be coming back to that in a moment. Now, one of the unfortunate things about Pierre Bourdieu, I don't want to be too hard on him, he did some very, very good work, a lot more than me, is that he did tend to concentrate on factual programs. That is, that he wrote about the news, he wrote about the television interview, and so on. Now, these are important elements, but for quite a number of intellectuals have written, if you like, too much about the news and documentaries, or at least not reflecting the fact that the majority of television time is not news and is not documentaries. And so there has been less serious work done on other kinds, sports programs, cooking programs, dramas, sitcoms, soap operas. There is a lot now, but the big famous theoreticians, especially of the 60s and 70s and 80s, Adorno, Bourdieu, and so on, they really like to write about the news, which they're allowed to, but I'm wondering if that's really quite as important as they make out. No, I clicked on that one. Is that the right one to click on? No, this one. I should be clicking on this one. Okay, so let's have a look at our very first idea here. Our very first idea is the question of agenda setting. Now, I just have to switch this over a little bit because I've got myself onto the wrong. Never mind. I got myself onto the wrong copy of the file in question, so I need to come back and share again. Window. Oh, it's two of them. Is that the right one? It might be. So just bear with me a moment. Yes, that's the one. Okay, so yeah, that double. No, it's not, is it? I'm sure which of these ones I need. I'll have to close one of them to tell them. All right, so let's just forget that and take a risk. Okay, so the idea that I wanted to look at here was agenda setting. What is agenda setting? It's an extremely important idea, and it's based on the idea that the television is not really very successful in telling people what to think. It's actually backed up by empirical research, which was done in the 1960s. In fact, agenda setting theory was formally developed by Max McCombs and Donald Shaw in a study of the 1968 American presidential election. And what did they discover? Yes, okay. Sorry, to answer Emily's question, the debates about the dangers of the TV started very quickly in the early 1950s, the late 1940s, especially the early 1950s. Once a lot of people have the television, but they were very, very present in the 1960s and 70s. In the 1980s, once Margaret Thatcher started attacking the BBC, somehow the university people stopped being so critical about television because they were more interested in defending the BBC as a public service. So agenda setting theory established by Max McCombs and others after they studied the 1968 presidential election. And what did they find? Well, they found that the television was not very good at telling people what to think. People did not think things because the television told them to think them. However, the television was very good indeed at telling people what were the important questions of the day. The television set the agenda. So, if the television on a given day talks about, the dangers of immigration and the rising crime, and a few other things, it will not succeed in making lots of people in the audience change their mind and say, oh yes, I agree with that because they said it on the television. However, it will succeed in persuading the vast majority of people that these are the most important issues today. These are the most important questions. The agenda, what we see on the news might not all be true, and in fact, people are very distrustful, but they tend to think that the opinions on the news are not so good, but that the questions dealt with, the subjects, are indeed the most important questions today. And so, of course, this has a huge political influence, because if the television tells people in the 1970s, for example, in Britain, tells people that the big problem of today is immigration, then people will tend to believe it. They will have very different opinions about immigration, but almost nobody will say, well, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. There are many other problems. We should be looking at other problems. That would be quite difficult. This is the idea of agenda setting, and there you can see on there. There you can see somewhere. I have no idea why this is doing this way, but let's say it is. Okay, well, it will come back in a moment. I think it's not appearing on my screen yet. So what you're supposed to be seeing is a picture of a newsreader. A picture of a newsreader. Is it charging from the key? That might be the case. Yes. It's a picture of a newsreader from the 1980s, just to illustrate the idea that it is in the. It isn't there. Okay, so this isn't helping, is it? Is it? It's not going to come up. Yes, there you go. How about that? Wonderful. I've now got my correct view, and here is a picture of Bourdieu. Just to go back to Bourdieu very briefly, this is what I wanted to show you, that on YouTube, there is a 1-hour lecture by Pierre Bourdieu in French sur la télévision, and I think it is very good. Yeah, and certainly, although he is French, certainly it would generally be considered to be a good thing if in the middle of your essay, and it was relevant, you said, you know, Pierre Bourdieu looked at, and this is what he said, and if you put in 3 or 4 sentences about what Bourdieu, I think this would be good. He's an international intellectual. Yeah, this wouldn't be considered to be off subject. Here we go. So here is one of Richard Dimbleby, I think, one of the great newsreaders of the 1980s, and I was just saying that then that the news is very successful in telling people what are the most important questions today, the agenda setting. Here is an example from CFAX, which was the ancestor of the internet. I already mentioned this. It goes very, very slowly. You press a button, and about 40 seconds later, the page changes. But nevertheless, this was still very impressive at the time because you got the latest news immediately, whereas normally you had to wait till the evening news or wait till the following morning and buy a newspaper. So it seemed very impressive, although compared with the internet, of course, it isn't. So here you can see that they've chosen, what is the most important thing? Babe Pammy is quitting the show, and burgers for pupils who go to school. So this is of course a criticism that we see often of the press, underlining the trivial stories about celebrities, setting the agenda in a way that many important questions are not touched, and very unimportant questions like Babe Pammy is quitting the show are touched. So that's just a little example, if you like, of agenda setting. Here's another one. Yes, now this is a recent example, but you could take it back. It's become worse since we have 24-hour news. But here you have the BBC News. This is from 2020. And notice that breaking news, quarterly lending figures up to 158 billion. And a number of commentators have said, when you put on the news, you always hear about what is happening to really rich people. Now we will take 5 minutes to tell you how all the big companies are doing in the stock market. Whereas, in fact, the vast majority of people do not have shares in the stock market. And so what we have here is a way of underlying priorities that the BBC is saying when they spend a lot of time on banks and savings, and most people don't have savings, and the stock market and so on. They're saying, that this is they're valorizing the financial sector, and this is the normal part of life. So we're not talking about your life, we're talking about what's important, and that's a form of agenda setting. That is to say, setting priorities. Now, one last example. One last example here is from 1981. Then. 1981 Panorama, yes, the weekly television documentary show. Trade Unions and the Law, presented by David Dimbleby. Panorama tonight examines the government's controversial proposals to limit the power of trade unions. The Right Honourable Norman Tebbit, Member of Parliament, Conservative Secretary of State for Employment, explains why he believes new laws are necessary to make strikes more difficult. Trade union leaders and employers debate whether changes in legislation will bring chaos or calm to industrial relations. What we can see here is that the BBC description is showing what the priority is. Notice that the priority is not saying, with a new law, will trade unions be able to protect working conditions better? Will workers have a better life? That's not the problem. The problem is, will there be more strikes or less strikes? So this is the agenda set. This is the big question. The BBC says it's the big question, so most of us will of course, follow. Now, there is some history to agenda setting even before the 1960s, but a very key quote comes even before the study in 1968 and 1963, and it's Bernard Cohen who says, he's writing about the press, but this applies to television. The press, I quote, may not be successful much of the time in telling people what to think, but it is stunningly successful in telling its readers what to think about. Okay, I'll repeat this. Bernard Cohen said that the press may not be successful much of the time in telling people what to think, but is stunningly successful in telling its readers what to think about. And this has been very much applied to television. If you think of today and cancel culture, that's probably a good example, because a lot of people consider it to be a major question because it's been put through on the news. What are the weaknesses then of agenda setting theory? Well, one of the weaknesses is one of the same things I said was a weakness of Bourdieu, that it does tend to focus on news media, and it has relatively little to say about entertainment. But in the widest sense of the word, entertainment is the majority of television. Drama plus comedy plus theatre plus sport plus cooking plus gardening plus quiz shows, etc. But the idea of agenda setting can also be applied to entertainment. If you are like me and you like romantic comedies, one of the things that you'll notice is they're all about rich people. They're just everybody lives in these huge houses, and that's taken for granted. And this is a form of agenda setting. The next big concept I want to look at. Oh no, I have another quotation, which I've already spoken to you about, which is a similar idea about agenda setting. And this is John Molyneux, Marxist critic. Why do TV companies produce The Apprentice and Dragon's Den about how to be successful businessmen, but not how to be a union representative? Why does almost everyone in EastEnders own a small business? Why do all news outlets assume that when stock markets go up, it's good for everyone? And if the media are only giving people what they want, then why do people want what they want? And is it true that all the media are giving them, that is all the media are giving them? John Molyneux argues that the media are biased, not as in right wing, but as in pro-capitalist. And as almost all mass media are owned and controlled by either capitalist companies or capitalist states, it cannot be otherwise. Molyneux warns against the notion that the media are all-powerful, looking at the limits to their power and the possibilities for combating them. Through critically using the mass media and creating our own media, we can contribute to anti-capitalist struggle. So John Molyneux there, looking at the television in general from the point of view of how it maintains the status quo.
And I'm going to stop there. I've got through two of my six, I think two of my six concepts that I want to look at to give a clearer view of some of the theoretical ideas which will help us to understand the BBC and the history of the BBC. So thank you for listening. There will be another one of these in a few days' time, perhaps a week's time. So all I need to do now is to stop sharing my screen and click on mettre fin à la réunion pour tous.